After a break of 3 years, his new album, Life in Slow Motion, sees him back on top form. Here singing Alibi, welcome please, David Gray.
Although singer-songwriter David Gray was born in Sale in Cheshire, his formative years were spent in the coastal village of Solva in Pembrokeshire. It was here, during the 1970s and 1980s, that his passion for music and art developed.
This is where I used to live, the little cottage you can just about see on the right there with the porch. And this was just a shed which my dad made into a sort of makeshift factory which had sewing machines downstairs and storage upstairs. My mum was making these sort of cottagey kind of clothes, 70s style quilted with Liberty fabrics and Tana lawn. Yeah, that was just a hobby that she was getting into. And I think they came down here, they really didn't know what they were going to do. And that became what they did. They got a couple of other outworkers to help make things, and then converted the shed into a sort of workroom and began to make these clothes, and it became a bit of a success, and Liberties took them and put them in the window. I remember we'd take these trips down to London in the family, what was first a huge estate car, and then became a transit van as the demands to buy more and more quilted fabric increased. So we'd go down to London and just load up with all this stuff and then come back again. But I remember stopping outside Liberties while my dad ran in with a load of stuff, a sort of hand-delivered approach.
As the business grew, David's parents decided to concentrate more on the retail rather than the manufacturing of the goods. Their presence became more visible on Solva's main street.
This is the village shop, this little tiny bit here, when we moved to Solva. My parents bought that, and that's where that was Cottage Quilting it was called. It's where they had their clothes, a little outlet for their clothes, and they'd sell a few in the summer and what have you. It was more seasonal. And then after a little while, they were doing quite well, and this one came up, which is called Cottage Clothes. So they bought that and they moved all the clothing into there. And then this became like a little craft shop. And the business was growing and profits were getting up, I suppose, and they bought this one in between. And then eventually that came on. So the whole thing became some giant vortex of craft opportunity.
But for young David, moving from industrial England to rural Wales was one big adventure. He says he settled down immediately without any heartbreak.
I don't remember any sort of sense of worry or dread on having to leave all my friends behind and everything I knew. I think I just accepted it. I remained in touch for a while. I wrote letters to a couple of people, but once I came down here, I just got caught up in being somewhere else. Action Man used to play in the garden in my imaginary games in Manchester, and the garden was this vast sort of area that he had to explore, but when I came down here he just kind of got left in the box because I was suddenly Action Man, because I had this entire world to sort of lose myself in. I remember I couldn't believe it the first time we got here, that I don't think I'd seen the cottage even before we came, and we were right underneath the woods, and I just went off exploring. I climbed over the fence and climbed up into the woods, and there was someone had started making a den, so I started making more of a den, and hours later I sort of returned. So that's my earliest memory of coming down here. This was the playground, this was it. There's sunny Solva, well, Lower Solva, the park, the woods coming up, and this amazing path. At the end of this hill, there's an Iron Age fort from a settlement. And these feet have been passing down here for thousands and thousands of years. And it's like these sort of vertebrae of rock. You're basically walking along the spine of the hill. It just seems unchanged, totally unchanged from when I was a little boy. The smell of the gorse and everything. Oh, it's great. And then there's a secret world down here. Quaden Valley. Dogs emerging. Yeah, this was it. About as far as the hillside on the other side, that's where we'd ramble to. We wouldn't often go further than that. My neighbours were the Blands, and there were 3 boys. Martin's the eldest, my age, Nicky and Richard. And there were the Reeses who lived just over the river. There weren't that many children in Lower Solva, and there was about 5 or 6 of them. And we'd basically all just play out, and it would be, you know, games in the park or whatever it would be, British Bulldog or cricket or football or hide and seek, or, you know, getting back to base or whatever you call it. But just playing out into the evening as well. There was nothing to worry about. No one was, where are you? Here we are, the mists of time have rolled in and I'm travelling back in time. This is the football pitch. Epic games took place here. Imaginary games. I guess this would be the late 70s, so who would I have been? Manchester United, Stuart Pearson, Jimmy Greenough, Steve Coppell was my hero. Anyway, this was the pitch. It all seems pretty much the same. This is where my first performance took place, up here. So this is where I was the wizard. There were my audience. I think Diane Thomas was the witch, and David Philpott was supposed to be the wizard, and I was just something else, you know. I was like elf number 5 or whatever. But David Philpott got sick the day before the show, so the main rehearsals were the day of the show and the day before. So they asked if because I had a good memory, whether I could try and learn his lines. So anyway, I did the best I could, and I learnt enough to be able to do the show. But there were certain dances and songs he had to sing, which I just had to sort of make up, because there wasn't time to teach me them. So I had to improvise. And obviously I went down a storm with my... I can still remember it, the whole thing, with the beard and doing my funny dance thing and singing. And the crowd absolutely loved it. So it was a big hit. And I remember that euphoria that you get when you're on stage, because I was very shy and still am, really. I loved playing football. I played football all day and all night if I could. I remember playing for the school here, against playing other schools as well, going over to Roach for a little competition between different schools, playing up at the playing field. We had a good team when we came to the under-16s. Solva we were a good team. We won the cup, which I think was the first time that Solva had won it. I remember being, oh look, I'm up here, I'm on the wall, look. Local celebrity. There's Simon Davis, who was virtually my neighbour, who's gone on to great things, great footballer with Ronnie Bynan. He's playing for Fulham now. He's had a great career. Fantastic. In my day, the local hero was Ian Walsh, who played for Crystal Palace. He scored a great goal for them once, which I remember watching on Match of the Day. And he came to the Solva football dinner dance, which was the annual event when they handed out the sort of best young player, you know, player of the year and all that kind of stuff. and we'd all sort of quietly run riot. So this was the class they put me in. The first day at school I was here, they put me in here. I was young for my year, so they thought that this might be the right class for me. But I think I was a bit too far ahead on what I'd been learning in Manchester. So I was here for, I think, just a morning with Mrs. Salmon, who was the teacher here. She was lovely. And then I was moved on to the next year up, where I was for quite a while. It's funny, it hasn't really changed at all. I thought that they might have changed it, but it's exactly as I remember it, all of it.
Join us in part 2, when David Gray recalls setting up his first band for a school disco in Pembrokeshire, and how the Welsh coast and the Irish Sea still invoke deep feelings in his soul.